ready to get started. So let's bring our first speaker onto the panel. And it's Colombe, who is the New Products and Services Director from IAB Europe. Colombe is going to be discussing privacy and consent within connected TV, and I will throw over to you to introduce your wonderful panel. Colombe, able to come onto the virtual stage?
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Sorry, I had a connectivity issue for 1 second, just at the very timely moment. Thank you for bearing with me. I have to say I'm very, very excited to be kickstarting today's event, which is growing in popularity from what I hear. You know, as Ryan said, connected TV evolves at a very fast pace, and with all the developments currently happening across digital and linear channels. You know, right now in this panel, we will discuss specifically CTV and privacy. And according to the ADEX report that was presented last May at Interact, CTV continues to grow around 23.5%, if I'm not mistaken. And at the same time, privacy does remain a critical area for all the digital advertising industry players. So today we are diving into the regulatory environment surrounding CTV, exploring consent, privacy disclosures, user experience challenges, and all sorts of other emerging you know, opportunities. So we will look into you know, providing insights on how we increase or continue to build trust while we ensure compliance, and at the same time still optimizing for campaign effectiveness. Myself, I had the chance to look at CTV CMPs a while ago as part of the TCF compliance work, and I'm quite happy, or actually quite looking forward to discussing how things have been evolving in the space. And for this discussion, I'm happy to introduce the three panelists that will share the floor this afternoon. First of all, Stefania Radzivonik, Director Partnership Supply EMEA at Verve. Davide Rosamilia, VP of Product at ID5. And Jan Winkler, CEO of Consent Manager, a very long-standing member of TCF instances. So without further ado, we can jump right in with the first question for this panel today. What are CTV players doing now to address privacy? Do they provide transparency disclosures, and do they collect consent from their users? All of these questions we want to hear from the panelists, but also we want to know if the practices have evolved in the last year. So maybe we can start with you, Stefania. What do you think?
Very nice to meet you all. Definitely, I would like to mention that moving from traditional TV to digital one has made TV planning, activation, and measurement more complex. And of course, in that context, individual tracking with use of personal data has started to be frequently employed. All of this is, of course, with the goal to deliver cutting-edge targeting and effective performance analysis. Unsurprisingly, it brought concerns around user privacy and data protection. As one of the first options, deeper consideration of every privacy-related decision was suggested for media companies. Of course, in line with its market position, data usage in context of business value versus privacy cost, and compliance with regional regulations. But while all these steps seem theoretically relevant, they are too complex for CTV. In practice, future-proof growth of CTV will call for standardized and privacy-safe identity management approaches. And here it should be highlighted that the understanding of the privacy-safe environment itself has been already undergoing dramatic, but without any doubts, positive changes. So let's remind us that we started from not collecting at all any consent in CTV space, then we moved to Boolean consent, and now we are requiring TCF and IAB compliant consent to apply for CTV space as well. I think definitely more to come here.
Thank you, Stefania. Davide, do you have, what's the point of view from your company?
We work a lot with publisher directly, and CTV publisher have gone through tremendous changes, I would say, over the past year. A little bit echoing what Stefania said, there has been a change from not having any form of consent required from apps, OEM or OTT, to moving towards consent maybe baked into the term and condition. And more recently, I would say, the majority of the players have CMP, which are IAB compliant and therefore release a TCF string, which can then be used across the supply chain. Obviously, these often come from challenges because a lot of the publishers come potentially from a more linear background. So there has been first an education that they've had to do internally, and then also a education of the industry, because it's very difficult to have an individual consent on a CTV level, right? It's mostly a household level consent. And then when we also look at the technicality itself, it's quite complex to provide the same granularity of consent to the user because just of the user experience, for example, or just the way that it gets interacted and consumed as a medium. So definitely there has been a lot of progress. I think that there is still a need for a little bit of standardization though.
Thank you, Davide. Yeah, indeed. I mean, the user experience is quite different from, on CTV when you compare it to mobile or web. How is that different? Why is collecting consent so different? What are your thoughts? Maybe Jan, do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So from a CMP perspective, I mean, there's obvious differences, right? You have a bigger screen on a TV, and you have a small screen and on a mobile. You have a back channel, meaning you can use your hand, your gestures, these kind of things. You have buttons. While on a TV, you usually have a remote. Modern remotes have mouser-like kind of behavior, but it's still not the same. You don't really point at the right thing. So there's a bit more UX challenges that you have to touch the right element and to get on the right elements, and therefore the design of the consent layer or the consent window needs to be usually bigger, more user-friendly, not so much details, not so many options. And then there's just let's say, I don't want to say environmental, but on where you watch these things or where you see these things, meaning TV is usually a darker surroundings. You maybe sit in your bed or something at night. So the contrast is a bit different. You would have a darker background, bright text on it, while on a mobile, a bright background doesn't hurt, right? You have a white background, black text, these kind of differences. So there's, from the user experience perspective, huge differences on both ends, which will then translate into design choices that you would do or would do differently.
Yeah, and also from a consent point of view, you're collecting consent for multiple people, right? It's a household, there are multiple people. How do we do that? Do we personalize more? Do we personalize less? Davide, what do you think?
I mean, the confusion, not even the confusion, I would say that the issue here comes from the legislation perspective, right? GDPR always talk about personal data. There is no definition of household data, right? It's just considered another form of personal data. So it doesn't get treated differently from a regulatory perspective, how we collect consent or how consent get processed. What does change, though, is all the technique behind it. For example, how do we handle opt-out? You know, on the web, it's very simple. You opt out the user, it might be a cookie, or it might be at the user level, depends on how you approach the problem. At the household, when you go to CTV, you can't opt out a specific user. You have to opt out the whole household. And I know that there are different, to your point, Colomb, profiles that you can have, you know, within different apps, which could theoretically give a more idea of an individual, but in practice, the majority of the population doesn't use them. It's maybe for children and parental control, in which case we shouldn't collect the data anyway, which is a different story. And so it just added a layer of complexity to the industry, especially for ad tech intermediaries that provide the technology on how do we handle all of our obligation, not from a user perspective anymore, but from the whole household itself.
Stefania, you know, I think there's quite a big shift on the way, specifically from the user experience. What do you see in your space?
Yeah, definitely. Maybe something to add to the previous question also, as we've been focused on the emerging channels, responsible, sustainable, and privacy-safe advertising across multiple platforms, we also see that media owners found the way out and started to redirect users from smart TV environment to websites or apps to collect consent in easy way. But as Davide also mentioned, unfortunately, it still brings challenges when it comes to opt-out options. So what we are seeing is definitely a big shift in personalization, and where the question of addressability in a privacy-safe environment has been already more frequently raised by both marketers and publishers. Privacy-safe is definitely a good, but at the same time, as per Verve Addressability Report, 44% of publishers and media companies have already acknowledged that there is a decrease in their ability to monetize their unaddressable audiences. So currently what we are seeing is that publishers and media companies are relying more on contextual targeting and third-party cookies if we talk about web. Also, if we look into CTV, let's say specifically in multi-platform prism, we are seeing that in the next 6 or 12 months, more than 30% of the companies expecting to begin to use publisher-provided IDs, Google Privacy Sandbox solutions, seller-defined audiences, and universal IDs. So without any doubts, we are seeing that there is a strong focus on contextual and leveraging first-party data. And this is becoming key areas in terms of personalization change.
Thank you, Stefania. So, you know, it's quite hard to come up with a good CTV CMP. You know, what would you say, Jan, what would you say stands out when it comes to actually, you know, designing the right solution? I think you touched upon that a bit earlier as well, but in terms of consent, what do you think stands out in terms of really having a good CTV CMP?
Yeah, first of all, I mean, the definition of good, so to say, is always a bit of a struggle. You have clients that focus, let's say, that have a stricter view on the law. Some have a less strict view and focus a bit more on the marketing side, so to say. So there's not really a clean line where you say, okay, that's a best practice, or that's a best practice. It's more individual on the clients, what they want to achieve. Simple things like a reject button on the first layer will lead to rejection rate, but some clients have the interpretation of the law that a reject button might not be necessary, for example. So these kind of decisions can make a big influence on the results that you get, and from the legal perspective, from the UX perspective, from the from the acceptance rates, maybe even bounce rates, things like users not using the app just because they are annoyed. Just a practical example from my TV. Every day when I watch a certain TV app, I get asked every day again if I want to accept. So it's just a technical thing that doesn't really work well, right? So these kind of things can make a big difference. In the end, what we recommend from a CMP perspective is testing, meaning different devices, different screen sizes, different in TV you have different TV what they call manufacturers, etc. But also different design options. Usually when we look at clients that test different designs, we see that the clients that actually test something in average achieve a higher acceptance rate, usually something like 50%, compared to the clients that don't test at all. So really just doing a bit more, testing a bit more can make a huge impact.
Yeah, that's a great advice. More testing and multiple interfaces to play with. So now looking a bit at the future, you know, everything is evolving super fast and we all have to adapt. But now can you see, I mean, can you foresee what's going to happen in the next year or 2 years regarding CTV? And what do you think the trends are going to be? Davide, do you want to try and take a stab at that one?
Sure. I mean, obviously, many different directions. I see the overall CTV industry going, but when we look specifically at privacy and identity, I would say that we will probably see a more standardized approach in terms of framework on how to collect consent, how to distribute consent, and how to handle regulation CTV, not just in Europe, but also outside of it. And then we will probably see a trend in which we will see IP address being less and less used. Today, IP addresses are very often used for targeting and other use cases, just because it's an easy available signal to use. And we will see a shift more towards universal IDs, which are not just more stable and scalable, but also are better from a privacy safety for the user. And then as the last trend, I think that, you know, we will see the remaining publishers that are still in the process of adopting consent or privacy framework to probably standardize the same way that we saw the TCF adoption in the web going.
Stefania, what do you think?
Totally agree with Davide. And maybe also to add here, I believe that cohort-based method would provide ways for media owners of accessing device data to make smart segmentation of their audience on the basis of anonymized interest or characteristics. In other words, I believe that contextual advertising would thrive in the future. Also, seller-defined audiences would help to create targetable audience groups for publishers. So definitely first-party data leveraging would also play an important role in the future of CTV. From the measurement perspective, if we, let's say, address addressability, it seems like still brand uplift, conversion studies, panel-based ad ratings, statistic sampling, and media mix modeling would remain the most privacy-conscious CTV choices. However, of course, it's to be confirmed in the next few years as a CTV space is improving and developing pretty fast.
So Davide, you mentioned more standardization for CTV. And recently, there was an update to the technical specs of the TCF specifically for CTV. The standard naming conventions for storing the TC string, to be exact. How did the specs help overcome some of the previous challenges? And what are the remaining challenges now with the CTV in terms of standardization?
I would say that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was saying that the standardization challenges are not that much into the technical framework now. Definitely is definitely a more welcome update, I would say. But the challenges are more in adoption of the different framework, right? We know that adoption at the beginning is very slow. I mean, we're seeing it with TCF2 and TCF 2.2. It will take quite a while. It's also on the differentiation between, as you were saying before, household versus individual, and how do all the different player approach a consent that is provided household level and all the relevant obligation versus a consent at an individual level and relevant obligation. And I don't think that every player in the industry has taken the same route. So there is probably a need for more standardization in the view there, which can come from the IAB on one side or from the regulator in the other.
Jan, you actually participated in the Framework Signals Working Group where they, I think, discussed these updates. What are your views on that?
Yeah, I mean, updates or technical specifications are relevant and necessary, especially or also in CTV, especially in CTV when we have so many different formats, so many different technical frameworks that we need to deal with. Things like Android and WebOS and iOS logic, so many different things. So a technical framework really helps to ensure that everybody is getting a similar experience and everybody getting the same results, getting the same signals. The main challenge that we see is really a bit that David already said. It's the adoption. Clients have a hard time to navigate through all these different device types and different operating systems, etc. And it takes a lot of time for them to get there, to understand, and to implement. So that's where maybe we can improve a bit in the future. But at least that's where standardization also helps. So to say, we need to try to find the middle ground. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That gives really an interesting perspective on that and what how much work there is still to be done as well. Yeah, I mean, it would be interesting from your point of view, to know what words of advice you'd give to the CTV players in the market. We have many of them are on the call now. Stefania, words of wisdom.
Yeah, definitely. So my word of advice could be sum up as innovation for CTV players. So definitely interactive elements such as QR codes, shoppable and SK overlay ads would help to enable for CTV players greater audience engagement, brand connection, and return on investment. As well, I think innovative experimentation with ACR, next generation contextual advertising, and attention-based measures would definitely have far-reaching implications for the entire industry.
What's your view, Davide?
I mean, from my side, probably aligned with what Stefania said, I would say is start to adopt the technologies that are available. Don't just wait for, self-regulatory enforcement or in general, just peer pressure from the industry, but start to be at the forefront and standardize. Talk to your fellow publisher, to your ad tech player, and to the buy side, and just make sure that you all use the same language in order to trade media and measure it as well.
What about you, Jan? What do you think?
Yeah, the word of advice I would give is basically start early with the adoption. As I said, there is so many different systems, different logic out there. It will take time, so plan ahead and start early. The same with new standards. When there is a new standard, there's usually a time frame before it's launching, so to say. So again, don't wait until the data's there, but start early implementing. And the other thing from the UX perspective, as said before, testing is always recommended. It can really help. So that would be my 2-3 points. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we sort of have now a bit more time, just a couple of minutes maybe for questions. Ryan, what do you think? Do we have time?
I think we were due to wrap up at past, so I think we might have to call it there to keep conscious of the panelists we've got coming on. But thank you so much, Colombe, and an amazing panel. Thank you for taking on to that. Very much appreciated. Thank you to Colombe and the panel there. A really enlightening discussion around the importance of privacy and consent in connected TV. I think what's really clear from that session is that compliance and trust are always paramount in this growing space. And we really appreciate our speakers sharing their time